So welcome. This is the Thesis Dissertation General Information Workshop. I'm Dr. Shea Bigsby. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the coordinator of graduate writing services at the graduate school here. And in that role, my main task is to oversee the thesis and dissertation submission process. So for anybody who's submitting a formal thesis or dissertation, you're going to be working with me directly, or at least indirectly, electronically, in the coming months or years, as the case may be. Today's session is a very kind of broad overview. If you got a copy of the outline, hopefully as you walked in, you got a copy of the outline. We're going to cover a little bit of everything, and so I think you'll learn something new no matter which point you are at in the process. But at the very least, I want to make sure that everybody's familiar with the resources we have available to you. All right, so based on the responses we got to the registration, it looks like some folks are planning graduating in spring. Is that true? How many people are planning graduating in spring 2015? Summer 2015? Maybe you're thinking fall 2015? And then how many are not sure somewhere in the future, next year or later? Okay, very good. And so again, we're going to hit on things that will be relevant to everybody, no matter what phase you're at. And as you're going to see, one of the main sort of takeaway points I want to provide to everyone is that many of our resources are available electronically, and once you understand what they are and how to use them, you'll know where to find them. So obviously, you can always contact me directly. Hopefully, if you took a look at the outline of the presentation at the bottom, you're going to see there's a lot of useful information. There's my contact information, my office address, which is 116 Gibbs, my email, my phone. That's obviously one resource. You can always email me if you have specific questions. But secondly, you can always go to our Thesis Dissertation website. And for anybody who doesn't know that site, or actually even if you do know it, I'm going to kind of remind you how to get there. So first off, if you, like me, had this page bookmarked or saved or something, you would want to go to it fresh because it's possible that some of the most recent updates won't be present unless you go to it fresh. So if you were at just the main A&T website, you can find it under Quick Links, the Graduate School, and then Continuing Students, and then Thesis Dissertation Guidelines. And again, you'll find that little chart of clicks right on the sheet if you weren't familiar with it already. And the Thesis Dissertation Guidelines page is something I'm going to come back to time and time again in our discussion today. It contains the deadlines for upcoming semesters. So currently it has spring 2015 and both summer sessions. So if you haven't seen this already, if you're thinking of graduating spring or summer, please do look at these deadlines and sort of make sure you're operating in alignment with them. And then it also describes in some detail how to actually submit the document to the graduate school, which of course I'll go through with you today. And then it also contains our primary resources, the starting point for all of the resources that we have available to you. So I'm going to keep coming back to this page, and I would ask you or encourage you to do so as well. Okay, the first thing I want to sort of start with, the first thing I want to point out to you is that if you submit a formal thesis or dissertation, this would not apply if you're doing a master's project, but it would apply if you're doing a master's thesis or a dissertation. When the work is finally completed, once you graduate, not only have you completed a thesis dissertation, but it's also going to be published electronically to the Electronic Thesis and Dissertation Database, which is often referred to as ETD, Electronic Thesis Dissertation Database. And for those who are not familiar with that, I want to show you where you can find it because it's good not only for you to kind of see what it will look like, what the final result will be, but also you can look at previous work from your peers or from colleagues at this institution or other institutions. It's an international database. It's fully searchable. You can use institution name, you can use author name, you can use subject name, you could use all kinds of different keywords to find thesis and dissertations. And so you're really going to be part of a much broader, a much larger set of resources. And so just if you weren't familiar with this, the Bluford Library website is useful for a few reasons. Not only does it have its search functions, And also it has, if you haven't seen this, EndNote functionality. You can get a free copy of EndNote, which I'll talk about. This is the place to get it. But also under these A through Z alphabetical databases, you can see under D, there's the dissertations and theses full text. And if you go there, it'll look like this. And if you had a person's name, if you had the author's name, you could just type that right in. If you knew the title of their dissertation or thesis, you could type that right in. But in most cases, you're going to be doing an advanced search. And just to give you a quick example, if you go to advanced search, you can choose all kinds of different options, of course. But if you choose university or institution, and then you can type in North Carolina, and they type it all out, agricultural and technical. If you just search for that institution, you'll find all of the documents that have so far been published under this system. And we just started this program here a couple of years ago. So already we have over 200, almost 250, and there are many, many more pending. They're going to be closer to 300 by the time the pending ones go through. So you could come here, you could look through previous works by some of your colleagues, maybe some of your friends, if you've been here for a couple of years. And it's also great just to kind of get a sense of what the final product might look like in your field or even more broadly, not only in terms of content, but in terms of layout, appearance, the way it's set up, because you'll see it has a citation as well as a preview of the document as well as the full document in PDF. So again, as we go through all these various points, as we talk about the formatting requirements, as we talk about submission requirements, you want to keep in mind that the reason we have such specific requirements is that it's going to be going to this public, well, not exactly public, but semi-public international database, thus representing not only yourself, but the university. And we really want to put our graduate students' work in the best possible light. And that's one of the reasons that we kind of ask you to adhere to all these different guidelines. Okay. So I'll let you kind of go back there, explore it at your own leisure, but I wanted you to at least see where it is and what it is. And again, if we clicked on this, we would open this student's full PDF text, which is a pretty fantastic thing. Now, going back to our kind of home base, which is this thesis dissertation website resources page, one of the main tools I'm going to be using with you today as we go through this is one of the resources at the bottom. We have a lot of resources. We actually have a couple new resources that I'll highlight as we go along. But one of the main kind of general tools that I recommend to students is this one down here. It's called Guide to Writing a Successful Thesis or Dissertation. If you click on that link, it'll bring up what we are calling it's a soft chalk module. It's a soft chalk lesson. Soft chalk is basically just an electronic system for creating content for instructors. Essentially what this is then is it's kind of a separate website or collection of web resources that you can kind of play around with. You can shuffle through them. You'll see it has 11 pages. You can click on the pages directly and skip from one to the next. If you go under the contents, if you hover over this, it'll pull up the different page numbers. If you hover over the page numbers, it will show you what's on that page. And so this is going to cover everything from kind of understanding the big picture, getting ready to organize your chapters, some basic help with writing, grammar, mechanics, these sorts of issues, and clarity, reminding you about some on-campus resources, discussion of formatting, and then the last few are also very important. There's some information on procrastination, which is obviously a common source of difficulty when it comes to an overwhelming or complex document like a thesis or dissertation. We have some tools there, some links and suggestions. We also have some useful tools for thinking about how to translate a document such as a thesis or a dissertation into a journal article, a series of articles, or even in some disciplines, a book. In some disciplines, it's possible to derive essentially an academic book out of your dissertation. And then finally, there's a general list of resources, websites, books. Now again, when you first come to this resource, and looking back at this page, this is the one that's called Guide to Writing a Successful Thesis Dissertation. This is the home page, the landing page you come to. And obviously you can read it. It has my information here and a description of kind of my background. It has a description of what this is all about, gives you some kind of starting points as far as the thesis dissertation, but it also contains a number of other links. So again, if you want to find these things, this is a good go-to place to find them. There are 2 video guides, which I will mention again later on, but they're fairly new and they're not in very many places, so I want to make sure that you have access to them and you know where to find them. There's a video guide for the template. So in other words, the functionality of the template, you can see it kind of step by step in a video. There's also a guide for the electronic submission process. Now again, obviously I'm going to show you a little bit about all these things today, but if you are wondering, wait, I know he said something about this or that with the template, you will probably find it in that video guide as well, which is going to be, again, a kind of point-by-point guide to that process. There are also 2 other web-based guides, and those are also linked to on the thesis dissertation page. And then even within this kind of 11-page resource, I have a couple quick links to things that are particularly useful. And one of the most important ones is this, the general thesis dissertation links. So if I click there, it's going to pull up that resources page. And again, I mean, part of my goal, in fact, is to flood you with resources because I want you to see that there's a lot of information out there through A&T and even, of course, externally that you can find very, very useful in this process. One of the best sites as far as writing is the University of Maryland's graduate school. They have a writing resources page that's actually just for graduate students. It contains information that's not general information, but it's really just tailored to graduate student needs. Similarly, the Writing Center at UNC Chapel Hill, one of our peer institutions in the UNC system, has some wonderful handouts on the writing process, including some dissertation-specific handouts. And so again, I mean, the more resources you expose yourself to, the better prepared you will be. For all of your writing needs in the thesis, dissertation, beyond, I highly recommend the well-known website, the Purdue OWL, which just stands for Online Writing Lab from Purdue University. And essentially that is a collection of information on writing, from grammar, mechanics to citation, the big picture, all of these kinds of details. And so again, for your common questions with all those issues, I would definitely take a look at these sites. These are some really good starting points. And there are even some books listed here, many of which are available electronically directly through our library, some of which you can find in print in our library. So again, if you're early in the process, if you really want to get a feel for what's at stake and what are some of the best places to look, this general list of resources is an excellent starting place. So again, if nothing else, I want you to take from this session an appreciation of how many resources are out there, not only from us, but from other institutions as well. So again, this is a kind of good go-to guide. Okay, now I will point out that this guide, pages 1 through 11, also kind of take you step by step through the process. And I'll use that right now to kind of start giving you some general information and details about each step. So again, I'm aware that some of you are very close to the end, some of you are very close to the beginning, and everybody's going to have some different kind of takeaway from this, but it's important to kind of remember what the big picture is, what is the entirety of the process. And so obviously you want to keep that end result, as we said, in mind. You want to keep the not only graduation, but also the electronic publication in mind, because that's something that's very unique and important about this process. If you really want to think about the big picture, you can read some of these other kind of introductory guides. Certainly you'll be thinking about all the steps that go into this process, and I'll highlight a couple of these right now for you so you can understand what's involved. And if you're really ambitious, or if you really like to have things broken down for you, there's even such a resource as a dissertation or thesis calculator. And you basically go there, you type in your end date, your intended end date, and it will generate a list of steps that you should probably be taking at which dates from now until then. So for instance, if you say, well, I know I want to graduate in maybe let's say fall 2016, you're just starting, you know you might graduate fall 2016, you could type in December 2016, and it will give you some approximate guidelines. When should you really be thinking about developing your project? When you should be thinking about finding your advisor, developing a committee, writing each chapter, doing the research. It'll give you a nice kind of schematic. Now, obviously, it's subject to your own kind of flexibility, but it's a good kind of guideline if you really feel like you don't have any clue where to get started or how to make it happen from now to then. For those of you who are earlier in the process, I would certainly say get started early. The earlier you start, the better. And obviously, attending the session is one good way of doing that, to at least see what's out there and know where you need to go and who you need to talk to get things done. And when it comes to the writing, the same certainly goes as well. The earlier you start, the better. Good writing takes a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time just to put the text onto the page, and it's certainly going to take a lot of time to polish it, to edit it, so on and so forth. Okay. As I said, there are kind of resources for each step on this page. A couple things I want to highlight as we go through these. Two quick things. Now, many of you are already somewhat along the way in this process. You found an advisor, you have a project. Some of you maybe even already planned your defense. That's great. That's all well and good. Two important things to keep in mind for PhD students only, not for master's students, but for PhD students. If you're planning on graduating this calendar year, whether it's spring, summer, or fall 2015, it's important that I mention to you that you need to fill out a form that's called the report of your doctoral dissertation committee. You may have already done this. That's great. If not, I want to make you aware of it. You're going to get an email about this if you haven't already done it. Under forms for continuing students, there's a form called Report of Dissertation Committee, and basically you're reporting to the graduate school who the members of your committee are. Obviously your advisor, but also, and if that's not going to come up now, that's fine. But essentially you're going to be putting, it's not going to work right now. Your main advisor, your other committee members. And again, this applies only to PhD students, but it's important because for PhD students only, and a key part of the process is that you have not only your designated committee members that you've gathered and put together, but you also will have a graduate faculty representative from outside of your department. And the graduate school will assign you that outside person. Now, in many cases, that outside person functions primarily as a kind of an extra voice at your defense, and they kind of are there to kind of just oversee the process, make sure everything's going smoothly. But again, if you're planning on graduating this calendar year, please do make sure you submit the dissertation committee report. And again, only for PhD students, and only obviously if you have your committee established. But I'll point that out real quick. The other thing that's important, I'm going to change the wording here, but it says obtaining IRB approval and clearance is required for all graduate students. And you'll see what I mean later on. You'll see where that comes in. The point is, many students will, based on the nature of their project, they have to get some sort of prior research clearance from the IRB or from some other internal agency. That's great, but we also make sure that before these things are published electronically, all students get a basic kind of research compliance clearance. And I'll explain how you do that and where it comes into the mix. But I just wanted to point that out. When it comes to organizing the chapters, again, for those of you who do have a good sense of this, or those of you who don't have a good sense of it, for both of you, this might be helpful. In general, the kind of straightforward STEM field outline of your document would be something like this. You have 5 chapters: introduction, literature review, a chapter on your methodology in which you really dive into the logistics and mechanics of it. What did you do? How did you perform your experiments? A 4th chapter in which you really go in much depth on the results and analysis. And a 5th chapter, which is generally shorter, which is kind of a discussion, conclusion, and maybe a conversation about future potential research that could come from this project. Now, for some, this might be familiar. You might say, this is what I've been trained to do. This is what I understand. For some, it may not be familiar. You may say, wow, I really didn't know how to structure this thing. This gives you that schematic outline. And I'm not going to go through these points step by step. They're fairly straightforward, and you can read the points. But one thing I do want to highlight for you is the literature review. When it comes to literature review, our library has an excellent literature review guide if you haven't seen it before. And so if you have a general idea of what this is, a literature review is a chance to review and to report on previous findings in the field related to your specific areas of focus. You're going to address things like, as it says here, the conceptual framework for your project, background on other research, areas of inquiry that have or have not been treated sufficiently in the research previously. But even if you understand what it is, you may not know how to do it. How do I actually find this information? How do I make sure it's sufficient? How do I make sure it's written clearly and that it's laid out nicely? And the literature review guide from Bluford Library is really excellent in this regard. I think they will also have some workshops to address this. And as those come up this semester, I will even send out some reminders to everybody who's working on this. But the literature review guide is available to you already electronically. It's just one of the LibGuides from the library. It has kind of general information. What does the term even mean, if you really want to get it kind of locked down? What should it look like? How does it fit within a document? And then there's a video guide that really kind of walks you through it and guides you through this in more detail. So I highly recommend that if you're struggling with, or if you just want to know more about the literature review in particular. Now, some students ask me, and it's a good question. I mean, they see this, here's a very simple outline, 5 chapters. Can you have more chapters? Yes, absolutely. Depending on the nature of your project, you may have 6 or 7 chapters, certainly. In other words, some students will have, the first couple chapters are usually roughly the same. Usually it starts with introduction, literature review. But maybe they have 2 or 3 different kind of sub-experiments, each of which deserves its own chapter. And maybe even its own chapter of methodology and its own chapter of analysis. That's perfectly fine. As long as it seems logically coherent, as long as it fits the needs of your committee, and of course always go to them for kind of feedback information on layout, on content, then yes, it's fine. There's no strict requirement that it has to be 5 chapters. And also I will point out for some other fields that are not STEM, so for instance in leadership studies, which tends to be social sciences type of research, again, the chapter layout may be different. You may have a different kind of set of core chapters. That's fine. But this is the most kind of straightforward model. And if you look at some of those examples of previous submissions from our university, you'll see that many of them are along these lines. Some of them are a little bit different, but they're all roughly following this structure. And so hopefully just the idea of the structure itself is one thing that can help alleviate the inevitable anxiety that comes with such a kind of large-scale project. You can say, well, okay, at least I'm going to break it down into these sections. Now, introduction really is not the first thing you should work on. You should be more focused on these other steps. And then the introduction and conclusion will come later. But to at least know that you can break it down, you can really start processing it as you go. That's really helpful. And for those who are earlier on in the process, I would mention as far as methodology, take a lot of notes. I would recommend, if it were me, I would recommend from the get-go, as soon as you're doing any kind of research or even thinking about the project, you not only have kind of some general notes that you write down or you keep in your laptop or your tablet or what have you, but I would also keep some kind of a running methodology section. In other words, at least an outline, sketch the outline, get those pieces in place so that once you start writing, you basically have the schematic for the document right in front of you already. Just checking the chat real quick. And then obviously the results analysis, the discussion, those have to come later because you have to kind of see what you find, see if it matches your initial hypotheses. Okay. Any questions so far? At a few points, I'll kind of stop and pause for general questions. So far, as you will have seen, I'm kind of trying to give you a sense of the range of resources. I'm giving you a couple of key details of the steps early on in the process or midway through the process. But any questions so far? Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. And for those who are listening online, the question was about appendices. So in other words, maybe you have this basic layout of chapters or of content, but what if you have a huge number of images or a huge number of tables or something, you want to put them in a separate appendix? You can look based on other examples of what people have done. People have done it very differently. Some people will choose to have all of the images or all of the tables appear in the text, with a few exceptions, I suppose, some that are really long or really complex data tables. Some people have them running through the text with the text. So in other words, text, I'm going to refer to figure 1, here's figure 1 right here. Figure 2, here it is right here. But certainly there are cases, as I think you're suggesting, where with a very technical piece of work, when perhaps if you have, even if you've consolidated the data in the text, like for instance, you have a shorter version of the table, you put it in the text, you also want to give the full span of the data, which goes pages, pages, pages. Yes, you can absolutely have an appendix or several appendices, as the case may be, and those can run quite long. And that's fine as long as, again, as long as the content is essential. In other words, it's something that should be there. And again, if you want to, you should run it by your advisors to make sure that they think it is essential to have all of that data rather than just a consolidated version. But certainly, as we'll discuss as we look at the template and the formatting handbook, yeah, appendices are very much admissible, and they're quite common in various forms. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions as I go along, just raise your hand. I'll try to get to you right then and there, but I'll at least give a few key moments for questions as we go along. Okay. All right. I won't go too much further with this set of resources, but again, you can see how the pages 1 through 11 go kind of start to finish through the process. And wherever you're at in the process, you may find something useful here. Yes, another quick question. Mm-hmm. I see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great questions. Yeah. So for those who are listening online, she was asking about not only obviously can you include an appendix or what could go in an appendix, but also kind of how should the appendix be laid out. So even if you have a collection of tables or figures, how do you actually lay them out in the appendix? And she was mentioning that it's true that the current template has an example of an appendix with a table, with a large landscape table, but it doesn't really explain, what would you want to do at each step along the way. I think that's a great point, and that's something I can add going forward because I think it's a common question. I'm actually going to pull up the template in just a minute, and I'll show you exactly how it would look or how you do it. But the basic answer is for most documents, the approach would be to label your appendix figures or tables with A dash or A period 1, A period 2, A period 3, so on and so forth. That's the convention, and it's perfectly fine, in fact, if an appendix is solely composed of figures or tables. That would be fine. But those figures or tables do not necessarily need to be included in the list of figures or list of tables that you would have at the beginning of the document. In other words, it would be fine if you have Appendix A, and then within Appendix A you have figure A1, A2, A3, A4, even if those figures are not listed in the list of figures. And for some, this may not make sense. You may not even know what I'm talking about with the list of figures. For those of you who are further along, you do know what I'm talking about. This may be a helpful kind of cue. It can work either way, but that's a very simple answer to your question. And again, when I pull up just to make sure something funny just happened. This person's not allowed to become the presenter. I think somebody just grabbed this and they just put it back. Okay. Sorry for that. And so for everybody who's watching remotely, hopefully you still have the feed. I'm not sure what just happened. Okay. And you should be able to hear me. If you can't hear me via the web feed, please just type that in so that I know that something's still arrived. I think it's okay now. In any event, I'll show you some examples specifically from the template. And just to give you a quick kind of heads up as far as how this particular session fits in the entire semester. This semester in particular, we're going to have a whole kind of a broader range of specific seminars. So this is kind of the general overview. I'm trying to hit a little bit of everything for everybody's needs, but I will also have, for instance, a specific formatting template-oriented workshop. And that'll be even more kind of workshop-like. In other words, you can bring your work in progress, you can ask specific questions, I can come around and help people, and we can address the common needs of students who are even in the room, as well as just more common issues that can come up. So I look forward to those kinds of more tailored sessions as well, but I'll do my best to address all your general questions today also. But thank you for that question about the template. That's an excellent one about the appendices. I was just going to mention real quick, I mean, as far as this particular website with these other kind of sections, there are some details about formatting. There's some details about grammar and mechanics. So again, if you're concerned about grammar and mechanics, obviously getting an editor is a good strategy. I'll give you a little bit of information about how you can do that on campus in a way. It's not quite the same as having a full-blown editor. Many students end up actually hiring an editor outside the university, or in some departments, there are people who are kind of the go-to editors for that department. So ask your colleagues, ask your department if they have any information about that. Unfortunately, we at the graduate school can't single-handedly kind of copy edit everybody's document, though I'm very happy to sit down with you and give you some specific grammar pointers. But if you know that grammar or mechanics are kind of a general concern for you, this particular page, page 4 of the general thesis dissertation resources guide, contains some information on the most common errors. So whether you're a non-native speaker of English, or whether you simply want to brush up on some of these skills and issues, this is a good place to do it. So it has links to some of the best quick resources on common errors. It also has a link to some quizzes on these issues. So if you really want to kind of improve for the long term, not only for the purpose of this one document, but for the long term, for your career, for all of your writing going forward, these might be some things that you will find useful. Some really good, streamlined, straightforward tools in those areas. I also have a little resource about clarity in writing. And one of the most important things I would point out, and this applies even to a thesis or dissertation. A thesis or dissertation, on the one hand, seems like it's a very technical, it's a very tailored document. Really not, I mean, let's be honest, not that many people are going to read it from start to finish, if many do at all. Your committee is going to read it, obviously. We at the graduate school are going to read it. It's going to be available to your peers and colleagues internationally on the database, but it's a very kind of tailored document. And you might think, well, it's something that can be very technical, I can be very verbose, I can just do whatever I'm going to do and get it done. But I would say the most important thing to note is that with virtually all strong writing, whether it's in an email that you're writing in a professional setting, whether it's a letter that you're writing to a colleague, whether it's an article, or whether it's, in this case, a thesis dissertation, the best writing, the best academic writing is always clear and reader-oriented. In other words, the function of this writing is to communicate something to the reader. And so if you lose sight of that, things can become more and more convoluted, more and more jumbled, and less kind of clear to those who are reading your work. And so I have some very simple guidelines here. I'm not going to go through these right now in much detail because I want to get to some of the other kind of technical details. But even in cases where you're talking about very precise things, you want to do your best to kind of balance simply using technical terms with descriptive terms. And I can show some examples of this in some future workshops as well. Logical organization, this is key. Paragraph structure is something that people often don't think about, whether you're writing a one-page letter or a 200-page dissertation. Each paragraph should in some way clearly guide the reader from what came before. So again, if you think about a dissertation, if you think about a chapter on methodology, I mean, you could kind of have bullet points highlighting each of the things you did, and that would make some degree of sense. But to write it as paragraphs, you have to have kind of clear, what are often just called topic sentences or introductory sentences that guide the reader from one paragraph to the next. So having established point A, you say, in the next paragraph you might say, similarly, with this other research protocol, we did this. So even just using words like similarly or then or therefore, I mean, these are kind of simple guideposts that help the reader kind of follow your logic. And so those are things as you're really looking at your writing, you're really kind of copy editing, those are the kind of things you should look for. And I have a little kind of handout, a little guide that goes through some of the kind of core functions of a paragraph. And again, this would apply at any level of writing, whether it's undergraduate writing, whether it's professional writing, whether it's academic writing, whether it's an email to a friend or a colleague. One other thing I wanted to highlight, not only our office in the graduate school, but also the University Writing Center can be a resource for you. Again, one of my big picture kind of objectives this particular semester is to kind of coordinate more with the Writing Center as far as graduate student needs in writing. Now, there's no question I've had a lot of students go there and have great success. If you go there with the right objective and the right kind of understanding of what it is, you will have better success. In other words, the Writing Center, they tailor to all undergraduates, all graduate students. They can only meet with you in small sessions at one time, and they cannot, as I mentioned before, they cannot, just like I cannot, kind of single-handedly edit the document from start to finish. But what they do is they sit down with you, they look over, I think they can go up to 10 pages at a time, 10 pages of text, and they can kind of go through and find common grammatical errors, citation issues, these kinds of issues. So if you're concerned about any of these areas, it's not a bad idea to go there and sit down with someone for a half hour, an hour, and kind of walk through maybe a key section of your text, whether it's one chapter, whether it's a couple excerpts from different chapters, to get a feel for common concerns, common areas to keep working on. And again, I mean, you can go back multiple times if you'd like, but you can also, at least get some areas that you need to work on or need to keep developing. And that's not a bad thing to do as well for not only your current needs, but for your future kind of career prospects. I will just note that they are open during the fall and spring semesters, but not over the summer. They're not available whatsoever over the summer. So if you would like to use them, make sure you do so during the main academic year, fall and spring. And this gives more information about how to contact them, so on and so forth. Okay. What I'd like to do now is kind of turn to some of the more specific mechanics of formatting and then submission. Because these are the things that, for those of you who are going to be graduating sooner, you really need to know, the nitty-gritty. How do you format correctly? How do you use the template? How do you actually submit the document to the graduate school in order to kind of finalize the process? And again, what I hope you'll see is that we have this information available to you in a lot of different places, but perhaps partly because it's in a lot of different places, it can be hard to find exactly what you need at this particular moment. So I'm going to give you a kind of an overview, and I'll address any questions I can right now. And then, as I said, I will also have some follow-up sins to address the real nuances of, for instance, the submission process, because there are a lot of nuances that I may not go into full detail on today, just for the sake of time. Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is, again, on our main thesis dissertation guidelines site, the deadlines are here. There's a brief synopsis of how to submit, and then, of course, there are the resources. Now, I'm going to show you the Microsoft Word template. This is the template with which I can personally help you, and we at the graduate school can help you. We can help you with the Word template. We have just received and just added a new LaTeX-based template, which has been requested for quite some time. Now, some departments may have a version of this already, and that's okay for the time being. That's fine. If you're already working within, for instance, electrical engineering LaTeX template, that's fine. But we have a LaTeX template now that more or less matches or mirrors the Word template. So it's really nice because it allows you to make sure that if you're reading the handbook and it describes certain formatting protocol, this LaTeX template will allow you to adhere to our formatting protocol from the get-go, from the start, without as much kind of maneuvering or kind of redesign. And it was designed by one of our graduate students who's just recently graduated. And while it's an amazing resource, and I think it'll really get you started, he did a really fantastic job with laying it out and detailing how to use it. Unfortunately, we at the graduate school do not have the technical expertise to guide you through the use of LaTeX. So this was always true anyhow. If you were using anything with LaTeX, we could tell you what it needs to look like, but we couldn't tell you how to achieve that. And if you don't even know what LaTeX is, or you're not sure what it would be for, you probably don't need to use it. This is a very technical software for design documents. It's often used in engineering or in mathematics and some other STEM fields as well. But if you're really comfortable with LaTeX, you like using LaTeX, here's a version of the template that you might find very useful. And again, you can at least look at it to get some clues about how to do some of the things you might need to do in your own document, even if you're using a different template. But for our purposes, when I talk about template workshops, I'm talking about the Word template because that's the one that I have direct control over and that I can really help you handle. Okay, I just want to make sure. I thought there might have been some sort of an alarm going out. Did you guys get that as well? Was there an Aggie alert or something? Yeah, I was afraid it was going to interrupt our session, but thankfully it doesn't seem to be a problem in this room. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to pull up the template, and using the template, I'm going to show you what a document would more or less look like, how it would be formatted in practice, and I'll give you some of the key strategies to using the template itself. So if you've seen the template before, some of these things may be familiar, some of them may not be familiar. I'll try to give you some of the key, kind of a quick guide to the core tips, the core strategies that you may find useful, that I think most students will find useful. As I said, I'll probably even have a couple of breakout sessions where you can even bring in your own work and we can really work out problems that you're having or issues that you're experiencing. And then finally, I just want to point out again, I mentioned this at the outset, but if you go to that guide, that general guide to writing the thesis dissertation, on the first page, I also have the links to the video guides that I've developed. So there's one video guide to the template and there's one video guide to ETD submission. So again, some of the things I talk about right now, if you forget or you want to know more about it, you may well find that in the guide, the video guide. And the video guide has bookmarks, so you can jump from one section to another to find whatever you need. And it's not perfect video quality, it's not exactly what I would want, but it's a good start, and I'll probably make it even better over the coming weeks and months. Okay, so here's the template. If you haven't seen it before, this will all be new. If you have seen it before, parts of this will be new. The template is laid out such that if you bring your material into it, it will make formatting fairly easy. And again, I make that point to be very specific. Obviously, you could pull this document up, you could copy and paste some of the relevant pieces, put them in a different document, and then change the text as needed. But it will be much more effective, it'll be much easier to work with if you actually bring other text into this document. And so again, if you're just starting to work with this, or even if you've begun, but you had some confusion, that might be one of the sources of confusion. So the template is kind of set up like a document would be set up. It has obviously the preliminary pages, the title page, the signature page, copyright page, bio sketch. There are all these preliminary pages. It has a working table of contents, which I'll come back to. It has a working list of figures, list of tables. It has a spot for the abstract. It has the introduction. It has each chapter laid out. And it also describes its own functionality. So if you actually read, starting at chapter 1, it describes some of the basic functions of the template itself. So it's worth having a spare copy of this, or kind of a what about? Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And yes, the individual is asking about right. Just to make sure I understand before. I'm sorry?
Every line, table 1, table 2, figure 1, figure. Every line, you write figure.
I'm not sure if I know exactly what you mean. At first I thought you were asking about this issue, because it's certainly possible to do the chapter-based numbering. But as far as the layout of the list of figures and list of tables specifically, I mean, maybe I misunderstood your question, but
yeah, in the top
yes.
Page, I write figure.
Right.
And on the side page.
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
Not every line, I write figure. The whole figure.
Oh, I see. In other words, you're saying, could you have 1, 2, 3, 4? Yes. Oh, I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't realize what you meant. I mean, technically, I suppose that would be fine, especially if it's clear that it's the list of figures, of course. I understand your point. I mean, it's a convention that usually you simply put figure 1, figure 2, because it also, within the template, it usually is building it from within the text, as I'll show you. So it usually does it automatically. It generates this without your input. Of course, if you like, you could delete it. That would be fine. But as you'll see, if you're generating it automatically, it will pull up figure, the word figure automatically. But no, there's no inherent problem with that. And one of the main points I'm going to make as we talk about formatting, as we talk about these details, as you read the handbook or as you use the template, You'll see there are a lot of details, there's a lot of specifics. There is some room for flexibility in most of these areas within reason. In other words, the question like was just asked, yeah, I mean, there's no inherent reason that you can't have just one on the side, 2, 3, 4, remove the word figure. That's not inherently problematic. As I said, the way it's set up, it will do this automatically if you build it the right way. But there's room for small variations of those sorts. And there are many others as well we'll come to. Yes, I see a couple other questions right off the bat. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 It would just show like people want to show up there. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'll show you an example of that. Yeah, very common question. It was about table captions and how they appear in the list of tables. And again, for those who are more familiar with this, you'll know what we're talking about. For those who are less familiar, you'll see how it works in just a moment. And yes, your question.
For the figures,
mm-hmm.
Like for us, we plug the figures and we write some of the
Sure.
And when I put it on the do I need to follow on size of the what size is she using like data?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't look.
Oh, I understand. Do you mean within the image itself? Like, for instance, the image contains text or something?
The way we
yeah.
plug figures, sometimes we
sure. Right. And yet you're bringing it in as an image. Right. Yes, that's a very common issue. Yeah, absolutely. When you're creating a chart or creating a figure, in other words, you're creating something that's got text in it, but it's just an image. You can't literally highlight it within Microsoft Word and change the font. Within reason, again, you can use whatever font size is appropriate. In other words, it's okay if it's smaller than the main text, as long as it makes sense within the context of that figure. I could show you some examples, but there are many examples if I could pull some up from some previous students' work where it doesn't have to be the exact same font size, because it's more important in most of those cases that the data shows clearly, whether it's a chart or whether it's something else that you're trying to show. As long as what you're trying to show is clear, then the font size of those particular piece of text is not as important. And again, you'll see what I mean as we kind of look at some examples of this. Hmm? Okay. So it changes the font size or something? Or the...
Yeah.
Just the text that you copied?
Yeah. It's not image itself. I'm drawing up sketch.
Mm.
And sketch one. When I separate to Microsoft Word, it is I can't change it in Microsoft.
Oh, okay. Same problem. Yeah. And I mean, again, if it's for a figure or it's for a chart or something like that you've created elsewhere, of course it's understood that some of the font or some of the text will not look exactly the same. That's not inherently a problem, as long as the core body of the text is consistent and steady throughout. Exactly, right. Yeah, so that shouldn't be a problem. We can sit down and actually look at specific documents if you'd like when we get closer to submission. I see there's one more question. Let me take a question. Now I want to show you a couple of things just to make sure everybody's on the same page if they're not already familiar with these tools. But yes, one question back here.
Yes. So those of us who have equations.
Yes.
Would you prefer a list of equations? And if so, how do we do that? I'm not going to necessarily say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, no, it's something I will address even in future versions of the template as well. The basic answer is it's usually the convention that you do not need to include a list of equations, but normally the equations within the text are numbered in some way. So normally the convention is that it's usually chapter-based, or it could be just sequential. It could be equation 1, equation 2, equation 3 through the entire text. And then when you refer to them in the body of the text, you would say, as shown in equation 1.
Not necessarily the body. I'm talking about
right. Exactly, right. So as I mentioned, I thought I mentioned by my gloss over, what I was trying to say was you do not necessarily need that at all, a list of equations. And my point is usually it's actually the convention that you don't have a list of equations, but you will have some kind of equation numbering system within the text. And that's an excellent question as well. Yeah, good question. It is more common. It is more common to include a list of symbols or abbreviations if it's appropriate. Not all students do. Not all projects require it. But if you have, you can see some previous examples of how students have done this. But many people would include a list of symbols or abbreviations, especially if it's a heavy component of your document. Oh, how to include it? Yeah, sure. Okay, so first, before I even dive into that, let me show you a couple of things that will be useful. If you've never used the template before, obviously the first pages are straightforward. You replace it with your text. But the real functionality of the template, the reason that you would be bringing text from a different document where you've typed it up into the template is that you can use the update field function. So for people who don't know this in Microsoft Word, this is extremely useful, and it will be very hard to figure this out if you don't know this strategy. But if you click on the table of contents text, or if you click on the list of figures, list of tables text, you'll see that they become shaded, they're highlighted. That's because it's a field that you can update. So if you right-click within that area, you can update field. And then it can allow you to update the page numbers, or you can update the entire table. And so the point is, if you do everything right within the body of the text, and then you update the field, it will generate the list of the table of contents, or the list of figures, or the list of tables automatically, and it will update them automatically as you make changes, and once you go back and make those corrections. One short note that I'll make that's also very useful as a shortcut is that if you push F9, that's a shortcut for update field. So if you're clicked within, I think you have to be clicking within that particular field, or you could do Control A, which would highlight all text in the entire document, and then if you pushed F9, it would allow you to quickly update all of those fields where they appear. But again, you can also go to them individually. If you want to double check it each time, you can say, oh, I'm going to go to the list, the table of contents, I'll right click, update field, take care of it that way. You'll notice, and again, this is a source of some confusion, but the way that we've suggested doing this is that you break up your chapters into subheadings. Now, you may well not need these level 4 and level 5 headings. Many people only use these level 1 headings, then level 2, 1.2, 1.1.1, excuse me, 1.1, 1.2, 1.1.1, etc. The way the headings should function, I mean, if you're not familiar with this kind of a numbering scheme, it's fairly straightforward. If you had section 1.1, it'd be followed by section 1.2, or if you want to have a subsection under 1.2, it would be 1.2.1, 1.2.2, and then once the 1.2.2 is, say that's the last one, you then move to 1.3. So again, I mean, you have the levels of heading, they all proceed sequentially. So you have the chapters, which we're calling level 1 headings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many, and then however many level 2 headings, 1.2, 3, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then any level 3 headings you have under those headings, or even in some cases level 4 headings under those level 3, level 5 under those level 4. Those are all permissible, and they're all built in if you need them, so they should be functional for you. The appendices, as we'll discuss, come up. Now, the basic issue that comes up in the template is I'll first show you the basic text, and then I'll show you the list, the tables and figures. Those are where the main issues come up. I'll also point out, and this is another kind of quick shortcut that's often useful. If you go to the View tab in Microsoft Word, if you don't already do this, it's very helpful. You can choose a lot of different things. Obviously, you can choose to zoom. You can choose grid lines. You can have this ruler at the top. But what's very useful is the navigation pane, because it brings up essentially an outline of your document based on the way that you've laid it out. And thus, if you're moving back and forth between different chapters or between different sections, you can do it very quickly. So in other words, you may not remember where section 1.1 is located versus section 5.2. But if you pull this up, it'll have quickly the schematic of your entire document, especially if you kind of follow the guidelines I'm going to show you. So you can expand selection, you can contract, you can find subheadings, etc. Jump back and forth. So that's a very useful, quick tool, and then you can remove it over here. So that's just called the navigation pane. within the template, and again, this applies to the Microsoft Word template, the way in which the table of contents knows what it needs to include is based on these heading styles. So if you wanted, you could take the base template, like you could just have the template open. You could replace the text in chapter 1 with your text, so you could just highlight what we already had and then delete it and then copy and paste your text. That would be just fine. But if you had headings in your own text, they would not automatically be updated in the table of contents because Microsoft Word does not know that your headings, for instance, if I just type in, if I were to just arbitrarily add a new heading here, if I said 1.1, you know, whatever, I can bold it. It looks like a level 1 heading, or level 2 heading. That's great. But if I update the table of contents, it would not know that this is a heading. That's the predicament that you would face. You could copy and paste one of the ones from within the template. So you could take any of these level 2 headings, you could copy it, paste it, and then you could just write in whatever you want. You could write in 1.2, whatever else. I mean, it wouldn't go there, obviously, but you could copy and paste that way. That would work. But you can also manually do it by simply changing the identification of the heading level using the styles function up here on the right. So if you go to the home tab, it's these up here, and you can see they're named very easily for you to understand. Heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and if you open it, there's heading 4, heading 5 as well. And so if you wrote in your own manual heading 2, if you simply highlight that text and then click heading 2, it doesn't look any different, but if you click on it, you can see that it jumps from normal text to heading 2. And now if I were to, it's not going to look right because it's not going to make sense. If I were now to go back to the table of contents, right-click, update field, update entire table, it will add that as well. And you'll notice it did this thing, it added another number to the left of the chapter number, which might seem kind of awkward or unnecessary, which it very well is, and you can certainly delete it. The reason that that jumped up there, that these new kind of number before the chapter headings jumped in, is because Microsoft Word is using that to track which chapter is which. And that's very useful if you want to, for instance, use chapter-based numbering for your figures or tables. Because if you look at the base template, the way it comes to you, it usually is laid out with sequential numbering. So for instance, you have figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 through the entire text, right? So it wouldn't differentiate chapter to chapter. Chapter 3 might contain, you know, figure 5, 6, 7, 8. Not necessarily, they're not identified by chapter. But you can identify them by chapter because of the way that we've set this up. So what's actually happening is it's an invisible number. It's kind of hidden. That's in front of each of these chapter headings. And so sometimes when we update the table of contents, it'll pull up that invisible number. And you can delete it again. That's just fine. It's not a big problem. But that's why it's there. It's there to actually help you functionally. So again, within the text for the headings, the only way Microsoft Word is tracking the headings is based on the style, essentially. So if you tell it that it belongs to one or another style, it'll act accordingly in the table of contents. So if you accidentally told it it was a heading 3, it would appear further indented than the other level 2 headings in the table of contents. And you have to play around with it and see it in action to see what I mean. But I'll just point that out. If you check the heading style, that's usually the trick. Now for figures and tables, I'll just show a couple quick examples. The easiest way to do it, again, you could copy and paste an existing figure caption or table caption. That would be fine. But if you go to references and you go to insert caption, that's the preferred way to do it, or the best way to do it, I would say. So again, if you're using the Word template, you go to references, insert caption. It'll pull up the numbering, and it'll do it automatically. So here, you can see it's actually doing it by chapter. It's saying it's chapter 1, figure 1, 1.1. You do 1.2, 1.3, and then when it got to chapter 2, it would start over. It would start at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. You identify which type of thing it is. Is it a figure or a table? You can do equation, but as I was recommending earlier, it's usually preferred that you just kind of do those separately, independently. Using this equation editor, not editor, but this equation captioning system will probably be a little bit more cumbersome than it's worth. In my experience, that's my personal feeling. But figure or table you will use quite often. This, I think, would resolve the issue that was asked about before. Someone was asking, do you have to include the word figure? I think if you simply click this option, exclude label from caption, and you click OK, I think that, well, no, that wouldn't really work because then it would do it in text and in the list of figures. That would be not ideal. So if you want to have it appear in the text but not in a list of figures, you probably have to do it manually, which you can do, and that's fine. If you go into the numbering sub-tab, this is where you can select whether or not you want to include the chapter. So if you do not include the chapter number, it will label them sequentially throughout the text. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so on. If you do include the chapter, it'll do 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2, and so on. And for many, that second method is preferred with the chapter-based numbering. So you're more than welcome to include that. And I would leave this alone because it should be set up already. And this is why there's that new number 1 that I was showing you in the table of contents. It says heading 1 because it knows where the heading 1s are. It knows how they're numbered. In any event, going back, let's say you're here, insert caption. We're going to call it figure 1. You'll also notice it will automatically italicize and will also automatically update the numbers for any later subsequent figures. So again, that's one of the advantages of using a template. Obviously, you could do this manually. You could literally go through and number them individually, but if you then had to add one in the middle, you'd be in a very difficult situation. You have to then renumber all the ones that came afterwards. And so if you use this insert caption function, it'll automatically update the numbering for all subsequent figure numbers. And similarly, if you insert a new caption and you want to change to chapter-based numbering, it'll change all of them to chapter-based numbering, which is also good to know if you wanted to move back and forth and test. It'll bring up this caption. You can simply type in your caption next to it, whatever the image is. Now, based on the formatting that we recommend, we would recommend that you keep this italicized as it is, but you would unitalicize this part. There are various styles possible, but the style that we're using, the style that we have throughout the template, comes from kind of an APA document style. Not APA citation per se, but APA document style. And we want to use it for some consistency in our kind of formatting throughout the document. Yes.
This process has in tables and caption description.
So
this table and
yes.
this section. Does it mix?
It does not mix. If that's what you're saying, if you have figures and tables, is it going to mingle the numbering? Right. So, okay, I should also point out, I didn't do this, but if it wasn't obvious, presumably you would have inserted some kind of an image here. That would be the figure you're captioning. You can do that directly under insert. You can go to picture, or you can copy and paste from different sources. That's fine. And then this is the figure caption that goes underneath it. Let me address the question that was just asked about the difference between figures and tables by showing you how it would look. So already, just having done this, if we insert the caption the way we did, if we then type our caption right there, if you were to go to the list of figures, update it, this would now appear there with the correct numbering, and it would include the caption. So that's one shortcut. Now, a table is done very similarly. So if you go to References, Insert Caption, and you go to Table, you can do the numbering the same way, either sequential or chapter-based. The trick is, and this is the thing that has caused some confusion, and this is a question that was asked earlier, based on APA's preferred table caption style, it can be a little bit confusing because the way they want it to look is they want it to be split onto 2 lines. So you have the top line will say table 1.1, for instance, then the second line will be the caption, right? And so I think the question that was asked before was, if you just type the caption in here and then you update the list of tables, it will not get this caption. It will not know that that's part of the caption. So the trick is to do it this way. You type it all on the same line to begin with. So you say, well, whatever we're going to call it, it's the caption for table 1.1. You then can put the cursor right in front of the caption itself, the caption text after the table number. And then you can do Shift and Enter, and it will split it, but it will also maintain the kind of integrity of that split. It'll know that it's coming from the previous line. So again, it looks the same, but if you push Shift and Enter, it knows that it's a a split from the same line. And then you would change the formatting as suggested, so you'd have this be unitalicized and this be italicized. And then if you were to go to the list of figures and list of tables, both of these would update or should update successfully. Let's double check. Yeah. So now it got table 1.1 with the caption. It also got figure 1.1 with its caption. And you'll notice it does keep separate track of the numbering for tables and figures. So you don't have to do anything special other than identify whether it's a figure or a table when you insert that caption. Okay. Those are the kind of the most basic functions that I would want you to walk away with. If you didn't know them already, or at least have seen them, the list of figures, the list of tables, and the table of contents can be updated automatically if you do it right within the text. That's really the key takeaway. Now, there are a lot of other nuances that we could get to, and I'll try to address some of them. Someone had asked before about, there are a couple of unusual cases, like for instance, if a table is split across multiple pages, the convention is that you actually have a caption for it on each page on which it appears. So I'll show you an example. Yeah, we have one example here that's set up already. Here's how it would look. You'd have table 3.1, here's the table, here's the start of the table. Now this is particularly awkward because it really is only two rows of it that appear here, but for the illustration it suffices. The table continues here, let's say. Now, ideally what you do is this, you'd have it split and then you'd have table, the same number, and you'd actually have to type it in manually and continued. Now, some students are confused about how to do this, or they're not sure how we did it, but really what we did is very simple. If you had a table, so let's say you had the full table and here it's still connected. And so I'm not going to write it all out, but here's whatever the statistics were for male versus female. You can't just put the cursor right above this box, right? There's no way to simply put the cursor up here and type in table 3 continued. So you actually have to do is you have to split the table. So if you highlight just the rows you want to split, and then if you go under, let me wait for that to go away, under the layout, for table tools, there's an option for split cells or split table, and you want to actually split the table. So in other words, it's going to break that table off at exactly that point. So now it breaks it off. These are two separate tables, but we understand that to be the continuation of the same table. And thus you would manually type in table, whatever number it is, 3.1, and simply use continued as the caption. And the reason I say you have to type it in manually is that if you were to insert another caption here with references insert caption, it would pick up the numbering and then it wouldn't look right. It would say 3.1 and then 3.2, even though you actually want it to be 3.1 continued. So you do have to type that in manually. It's not a major problem. It's one of the final steps you would be taking once the document is nearly done. I would also point out, if you were to do something like this, you needed to do this, you really can only do this at the very end of the process. In other words, once all the text is laid out the way you want it. Because if now I decide I was going to add a couple sentences here, suddenly this is all on the same page and it doesn't make sense anymore. The split would be built in. So that's one sort of minor detail. And that's why we say, you know, it's really not a very major piece, so it's something you should wait till the very end of the process to complete for that very reason. Yes? That's a very good question. So, I mean, obviously, Microsoft Word does have its own table functionality, so it's often possible to recreate it. It's also possible if you have something within Excel, you can usually paste it within an existing table and it'll overwrite the cells, or you can nest the cells, or there are a lot of options you can use so that you don't have to literally do it from scratch, but you can at least copy and paste it if nothing else. I would say in general, I think most students probably do start out with Excel, and in some cases, I've seen them actually use an image of a table that was created within Excel, which is fine as long as it maintains the standards that are laid out. But I would think usually you'd want to in some way bring it into Microsoft Word, so you can actually adjust it within Microsoft Word if you needed to. So again, if you had an Excel spreadsheet and you copied those three columns and then you pasted them here, you could have the option of overwriting the cells, or you could start with one cell and it should be able to map it onto the existing table. In other words, I would say either way is fine, whatever you feel works easiest for you, if that makes sense. And if I had, I would get some examples, and I would do that if we have a follow-up kind of template session. I would show some specific examples. But I would say in those kinds of issues, either way works, so whatever works best for you, if that makes sense. There's no requirement. Yeah. Yes. 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 Excellent question. These are some of the nuances. She's asking about a landscape page, or a page that you have to flip the landscape because the table is too wide, right? And there's one example of this at the very end of the template, which, again, if you've used this, some of you may have seen. And the last page is, it's an appendix, but it's an example of a landscape page. Now, again, this is something I'm going to add because it is a source of confusion. You can even add a landscape page at any point along the way, theoretically, if you wanted to, right? So say in the middle of a chapter, you have one big table that you want to include. It's very wide, so you need to turn the page to landscape. The problem is if you simply go into page layout and choose orientation landscape, it changes all the pages within that section, which is probably going to be almost all of the document. So it's going to really throw things off. The way it works is this. You essentially have to have a separate section, and you can make just that section landscape. The section can be just one page. It can be 5 pages. It doesn't matter. But to make just one part of the document landscape, you have to divide your document into sections. And again, I'll just give you a quick sense of this, and hopefully just seeing this will give you some of the clues or some of the tools you need to do this later on. The document, the thesis template already has some breaks, some section breaks built into it that you wouldn't have to worry about normally. But if you wanted to add some, you would do it in this way. So let's say, let's just pick a part of the chapter. Let's say here in chapter 3, you want to add one page in the middle of the section that is going to be landscape because of one particular table. You can go anywhere on the preceding page. So go to the previous page. Let's say we want this page to be, this next page to be landscape. You go to this previous page, put this cursor anywhere on that page. Under page layout, you can go to breaks, and you can do a section break next page. And what it means is it's going to create a new section at the top of the next page. So again, I can be anywhere. I can be at the top of this page. It doesn't really matter. And I'll put break, section break, next page. Wait, did I do that? Oh, I'm sorry. I think I did something silly. Yeah, there it goes. So here's the previous page. We're going to keep that in its own section, but then this is going to be its new section. And then you can also, if you want to be just one page, you should create a new section coming out of that page as well. So in other words, when the section that you're going to flip is ending, make sure you have a section break going to the following page. So again, let's say we're going to make, we don't need to, but let's say we're going to make this table landscape. I'll take the same page, I'll do a section break for the next page. So now, if you double click on the heading, this is a useful clue. It gives you obviously the page numbers and all that. It also points out what section you're in. So it'll say section 7. Now this page right here is the only part of section 6, and then the previous page is section 5. And so each section can be formatted or treated differently than the others. So if you now go to our new section 6, which is its own separate section, if you go to page layout, orientation, landscape, it'll change to landscape, but it won't affect the preceding page or the subsequent page. Oh, it did affect the subsequent page. Oh, well, no, it kind of did. It must have, I think what it did is it pushed some of the text from that page to another landscape page. And so again, you would just delete that, but the section itself is maintaining its integrity. So you could have one big table and then it would go back to portrait. And again, this is useful because for a reader electronically, they would actually see it this way. So if you have one page that's landscape, they could actually be scrolling through and it would flow perfectly logically. I mean, obviously the margins would shift or would be rotated, but they could read it smoothly. They wouldn't have to kind of tilt their head or rotate it manually to see that table. Yeah, so I made a section break right before and then a section break on the last page of the section. And again, this is one of those things, it is fairly straightforward, but you have to just kind of play with it yourself. Just test it out 1 or 2 times, make sure you get it, and it'll work. Just in case anything else comes up. Because notice there are a lot of other types of section break. Usually, I mean, for the purposes I'm recommending, these rarely, if ever, come up. A page break is something that also often used, and that's just to skip to the top of the next page, essentially. And it can create confusion, in fact. So I personally, I don't use them very much. I just manually go to the next page. But you can do a page break just to move to the top of the next page. In other words, it splits everything underneath it to the top of the next page. But we're talking, again, about section breaks starting on the next page. That's what we're using. And we put one right before and one right at the end of that section. And you can play around with formatting within the section accordingly. So then you could change the margins within that section. It would only affect that section. You could change the paragraph style. It would only change within that section. So it gives you a little bit more leeway and flexibility that way. One other thing I'll point out, and I mentioned it just briefly before, the library here has free copies of EndNote for all students, staff, and faculty. If you don't know what EndNote is, you should find out right away and get a copy. If you already have EndNote, hopefully you're using it to its maximum advantage. But essentially, EndNote is a citation management tool. And so it will allow you to quickly pull citations from an article you're looking at. It will allow you to manage all of your citations. It will allow you to quickly generate a bibliography within the document. It will allow you to insert the proper format of citation, various points. And so, again, if you use EndNote, the library has version X6. They may get the newer version soon, I guess, but not yet. So for now, we have X6, which is fine. It's perfectly functional. And you can integrate it with Microsoft Word. So then, if you went into EndNote and Microsoft Word, you can actually insert a citation directly, and it'll pull from your entire library of citations that you've built within EndNote. And again, this is extremely helpful. It saves you a lot of time. You don't have to do these manually. It can be very, very technical to figure out exactly how a citation is supposed to look in any given style. And you are responsible for making sure that they're correct. So EndNote will help you do that much, much, much more quickly. You can choose what style it comes out in. You can do APA 6. You could do, I'm sure you can use IEEE with it as well. You can use other styles as well, numbered styles. And so again, I'll just make a point for now, and I'll send you reminders of this as they come up. But the library usually offers frequent EndNote training sessions. So if you haven't used EndNote yet, or you got it but you don't really know how to use it properly, they can train you quite thoroughly. The librarians are very adept at using it. They can help you correct errors. I certainly can help you with some of the small issues that come up if you come by my office for other reasons, but I would say the librarian staff is the best resource for EndNote and for citation generally. The one point I'll make about citation, and I think there was a hand I'll come to in a second, but one general point I will make about citation is there's some flexibility as far as which style you're using. It used to be a few years back, it seemed like there was much more kind of a constricted approach to citation. I mean, please use whatever citation style is appropriate to your field, your discipline, or whatever is appropriate to your committee or what have you. And if you use something like EndNote, the advantage is that you can move between different styles very quickly. You can actually shift the entire document from one style to another, having established those pieces. But the key is be sure you're being consistent and you're using one particular style accurately and consistently. We do often come up with small issues, for instance, with APA. If you were using APA, there's a lot of nuances that come up. For instance, maybe you insert a caption that comes up in the middle of the text with parentheses, right? Well, if you're using EndNote, you can right-click on it. You can change the appearance of it within the text. And again, this is more nuanced for people who would need that, but it's just worth pointing out. EndNote gives you a lot of functionality. You can play around with each of the citations once they're in the text. You can build the bibliography, so on and so forth. Any other specific questions at this point about formatting, template, etc.? Yes, over here, and then I'll come across. In other words, right. So in other words, you mean you're using their own citation library? Yeah, I get you. Yeah. That's a very good question. What the student is asking about is, in fact, Microsoft Word has its own built-in functionality that's it's not bad. And in fact, I think it's probably getting better and better all the time. And if you know how to use it well, it might serve all of your needs anyhow, if you see my point. So there's not necessarily any need to shift if you've already built a successful database of your resources within Microsoft Word's own system. But in general, I mean, librarians are likely to tell you that, you know, EndNote is a preferred style. It's more widely used. And so, for instance, if you're scanning journal articles, do they have quick links that let you bring into Microsoft Word? Because they usually do have a thing that you can quickly upload it to your, or download it to your, export it, rather, to your EndNote database. There might even be a way to do that with Word. There might be a way you can trick it into, or download it and then save it. But that's really the advantage, that EndNote is kind of integrated into all scholarly databases. So you can, you're searching online for an article, there's a little export link, you click export, export to my EndNote library, it'll connect directly to your EndNote library, put it right in there. That's an amazing resource. You can also link the, an attachment, you can attach the PDF directly in many cases. So there are really a lot of advantages for EndNote, and I would recommend using it if at all possible. Yes? I'm sorry, say that again. So do they have? So you said they weren't able to do that before? Is that right? I mean, it's been my experience that they're. I'd have to look. I don't think they have them listed yet, but usually they have a number of EndNote, like specific workshops, where presumably you could bring a laptop, you could sit down and get some feedback. It's also perfectly possible to go to the reference desk on your own if you have your own computer and you. In other words, if something looks right on in the discussion, but then when you do it yourself, it doesn't work out right, you can always go to the library and bring your computer or bring the file and try to sit down with somebody. Usually you can at least schedule an appointment, if not sit down right then. So I would recommend doing that. I can't say for sure offhand if they have a specific Mac kind of session. I'm not sure. But that's a good question. And I know there's at least one other question at this point. Did someone else have a question at this point? You still have a question, or? Yes. Like just within a table? Yeah, sure. I understand. Yeah, I mean, generally, if you're creating a table and it's built, especially if it's built within Microsoft Word, I mean, we'd recommend to use the same font and style and size as in the text, but there are some exceptions. So I think it's true if it looks better or if you feel like it's more functional to have single spacing within the tables, yeah, that's fine. In most cases, that works just fine. As long as it's readable and as long as it makes sense and as long as you do it consistently. So if you do it there, do it for all your other tables as well. And really with formatting, consistency ends up being almost as important as anything else. As long as it's internally consistent, that alleviates a lot of possible concerns. So there is room for some flexibility. We have guidelines, and I can show you how to make it meet our existing guidelines, but even if it's a little different, it might be just fine, as long as it's consistent, as long as it makes sense and is readable. Okay, for now, I'll wrap up with that, and I want to just briefly talk about the submission process, and this is where I'll leave off. And of course, you know, as I said, once you actually are engaged in this process, you may still have follow-up questions. In other words, no matter how much I show you right now, when you get into it, you might find, well, there's something that comes up you weren't prepared for, you didn't know how to handle. And that's why I'll probably have even a tailored session right near the submission deadline for the spring, in which I'll literally walk through it with you step by step, and you can ask me questions. But I'll show you quickly what it looks like right now. So the point is, having written this document, having sent your committee for feedback, you've gotten feedback, having prepared the defense, scheduled the defense, maybe you've even defended, you're now ready to submit the document to the graduate school. This is the final set of steps. A quick summary of the final steps can be found under our handbook. Let's see, yeah, there, hold up. On the second page of the handbook, we have a kind of quick schematic for step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. So step 1 is apply for graduation. If you are applying for, if you're planning graduating spring 2015, the deadline for graduation is tomorrow. So please make sure if you're applying for spring 15 graduation, you submit that application to the graduate school. If you have concerns about that, confusion, please call the graduate school office. They can point you to it very quickly. The second step is to defend. So you have to obviously schedule the defense, prepare your defense. Really with your defense, keep in mind that no matter what your committee might say, it really does need to be the case that you give it to them, give the full document to them at least, I would say it has to be at least a week, but I would think it should be 2 weeks or more prior to the defense. So in other words, they should be able to look at the full final or nearly final version of the document so they can give you meaningful feedback in preparation for the defense. Now, for some people, when they get to the defense, they're virtually, everybody's looked at it and they've already cleared everything anyhow. In some cases, though, it feels as though, some committee members don't get to the last minute or don't give you feedback until the last minute. And really, the process should work such that by the time you get to the defense, everybody's looked at it thoroughly and they have feedback for you as needed. That's how it should work. The oral defense form is then submitted to the graduate school. Now, this is the key deadline. So if we were to look at the, let me just pull it up again, the spring 2015 deadlines, please do refer to the deadlines on our site. Spring 2015, so the deadline for graduation, as I say, for application is tomorrow. The deadline for submission for defense is March 20th, so please plan accordingly. And then the deadline to submit it, what we're going to call the initial submission to the graduate school, is March 27th. And so note also that there's not as much time between the defense and the first submission. And again, the point is, by the time it gets to the defense, it really should be nearly done, and then you're making final corrections based on committee feedback over that following week. And of course, I would highly recommend that you do not wait until March 20th to defend anyhow. If you can defend 2 or 3 weeks earlier than that, that's all to the better. But you do have to submit to the graduate school by March 27th. And the reason for this is, obviously it's not the very end of the semester, is that we have to then look over each document, look at the electronic submission, make sure everything's done correctly, look over formatting, and we will send you a list of feedback with corrections that you need to make before it will be accepted for its final submission. And given the number of submissions we receive, we do our best to get them done as quickly as possible. So March 27th then is the kind of the key deadline for spring 2015 graduation. If you're planning on submitting and you're not ready by that point, you may well need to wait until summer. That is really an absolute deadline for all intents and purposes. Okay, so what do you actually have to do to get to that point? So if you scroll down on this page, it actually gives you the walkthrough of the submission protocol. It sounds fairly detailed. If you're doing it in advance and you go through it carefully, it's not really all that difficult. It just takes, planning ahead. 2 items, essentially there are 4 things you have to submit hard copies of, so to speak. And then you also have to do an electronic submission. As we talked about at the outset, the whole point of this is that you're going to be able to submit it to this electronic database. And so step 1 of the submission is that you bring to the graduate school these 4 documents or these 4 items, which essentially you could say they clear you for electronic submission. That's really their function. These are kind of the preliminary clearing steps. And then following that, you will then you'll create an account and you will upload your document to the electronic database. And that's the point at which we can begin to review the document and give you feedback, okay? So it sounds like a lot of steps, but really think about it as these things are to clear you to submit electronically. That's how this works. So in order to be cleared to submit electronically, you have to bring these things into the graduate school office by that deadline, by the end of the day on the 27th. And again, I highly recommend you do it prior to that because the earlier you submit it, the earlier we can review it, and of course you won't have to feel any anxiety about things that you weren't able to get at the last second or what have you. Yes.
March 20.
Mm-hmm.
This is the last day for defense.
March 20, yes.
The last day for submit the paper of passing this defense.
Oh, right. Well, normally the general rule of thumb for the students asking about the oral defense form, the oral defense form should be submitted. Well, first of all, there's one piece of information that's important to note. Technically, the oral defense form should be submitted by the department. It's actually the department's responsibility. It's not really supposed to go to the student. The faculty is supposed to collect it, sign it, department chair signs off on it, and then it's supposed to be delivered to the graduate school. In some cases, they seem to encourage the student himself or herself to deliver that document. It's not really supposed to happen that way. I understand it does happen that way. Either way, the point is that it's supposed to be submitted to the graduate school within, really 2 business days of the defense, ideally. So you defend on a Friday, it should be in by the following Tuesday to the graduate school's office, just so we have a record that the defense was successfully passed. Oh, so I guess, well, but it depends on when the defense is. If you defend on the 20th, you should have it in by 2 business days later, which would be the following Tuesday. So my point is, whenever the defense occurs, it should be in within 2 business days. But in practice, that's not a deadline that we tend to have any problem with. In other words, if it doesn't come in, we'll probably just ask the department, and then they'll make sure to submit it. Yeah. So in other words, it shouldn't be a deadline that a student should worry about. Right. They usually say 24 to, they might even say 24 hours, but if it's within 1 or 2 business days, that's no problem whatsoever. And really, again, yeah, the reason it has to come to us is so that we have a record of it. It's not the same as these deadlines. In other words, the 27th is an important deadline because we will actually see the documents right then, and they have to be in that day for us to check them off, if that makes sense. So I guess you're right. Technically, the defense deadline is the 20th. Technically, the defense form deadline is the 23rd or the 24th, I suppose, because, yeah, you wouldn't be able to submit it over the weekend. Anyhow, that's sort of a minor point. Yeah.
Let's say you missed the last the Friday mark.
Sure.
The final corrected.
Yes.
But I was able to finish everything the weekend. Still, I know I can graduate from the summer.
I understand. Sure.
But still, I can submit the graduate.
Yeah, and frankly, yeah, that does happen sometimes, especially for summer, because, again, you have the option of graduating over the summer, but for anybody who is considering doing that, I'll point out it's crucial that you speak to your advisor and your committee about this earlier rather than later. In other words, it's permissible to graduate over the summer, but you can't defend over the summer unless they are willing to defend over the summer with you. You see my point? Because a lot of faculty members will be leaving the campus once May hits or once the middle of May hits. I know it's an interesting question. I'm going to come back to it. But please do keep that in mind. If you're planning on defending over the summer, make sure you talk to your committee about it sooner so that you can make sure that's possible, that they're okay with that, that that's an option. If it is an option, then the deadlines that we have here will apply. But some students certainly do decide that it's a better idea to defend by, even if you, let's say you're defending by the middle of April, the end of April, the same point will sort of apply. Yes, you can submit the documents to us if you let us know. In other words, you may not be in our pool because we wouldn't expect you to be. Let us know just so we know where you fit in the system. But we can take your documents early and we can review it before the summer session would hit, absolutely. So for instance, for someone, if they were completely prepared, ready to submit, wanted to submit in April, early April or mid-April, yes, we could take those documents and we would be able to give you feedback as soon as we finished everybody from the spring, if that makes sense. But it would certainly be quicker than waiting until the deadline for summer 1, absolutely, if that answers your question.
My graduation is even still like maybe.
Oh, I see your point. Well, in practice, yeah, I see your point. It might not be that we can get to it until the very end of April or the beginning of May that we can start. You see what I mean? It's based on all the other graduating students that we'd be clearing first. Again, if it, based on your specific case, we can talk and we can figure out what would work, if that makes sense, if that comes up. Yes. Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's very hard to answer because we don't have an absolute. We go in sequence that they're received. That's really the way we have to do it. So part of the problem is, and it is a problem, honestly, when they all come in right near the very deadline, which makes sense, I understand. You want to take as much time as you need. By default, the students who submit at the end of the day are going to have to wait longer than the people who submit at the beginning of the day. So what we will do is we will try to give you kind of an update sporadically. We'll let you know, first of all, that it was received. We'll confirm that and that you're in our system. And in other words, if you're in our system by that date, you have no reason to be concerned. And if you have concerns, you should contact me directly and just let me know. For instance, if you know you're going to be out of town a certain weekend, you can let me know that. That would be fine, and we can consider that. But in general, we simply have to go through them on a case-by-case basis. And we get them back to you within a couple weeks. That's the longer end of the spectrum. And for people who submit before the deadline, it's even more likely that you're going to get them back within a week or so because we will be going through those much more quickly. But it's unfortunate if we did it a different way. For instance, if we had each individual sign up for a different slot, we could make an absolute. If you sign up by this date, yes, it will be back to you within X number of days. But it is difficult because they tend to be clustered all, however many dozen of them we get at the last day, and we have to proceed through this sequentially. But that's an excellent question, I understand. And please do feel free to be in touch. I don't have a problem with letting you know where you stand or where you're at. And you certainly should feel confident that once your documents are in, you will be reviewed in the order in which it was received, and you will get through this semester. There will be no way in which we won't finish it for spring graduation. A couple other questions.
Can I get it before I apply for graduation?
Not normally. Well, first off, the problem is for summer you maybe could. The summer deadlines for application for graduation are much later, but for spring, my understanding of it is this. I don't work on it technically. I don't work on it personally, but my understanding is that tomorrow's the deadline for application for graduation. However, you can apply late for graduation, which entails an additional fee of some kind.
Well, I'm paying for graduation in December.
Okay, right. Oh, I see. I see. Well, yeah, that's a different kind of issue. I thought you were thinking. Yeah, I was thinking of a different way. No, that's fine. The student is saying, can she submit and defend early, even before she's applied for graduation, even like a semester early, if it's over the summer more or less, or several months early. In most cases, that should be perfectly possible. And again, especially towards the end of the summer, we do get a few of those. We know there are a few people who they're graduating in December, but they've already defended and they want to submit and get the process cleared out by the beginning or middle of August. Yes, we've been able to do that. Absolutely. And again, always be in touch with me or be in touch with the grad school and we can make sure it'll work for your particular case. But yeah, usually we can accommodate that kind of a situation. There was one student back here. Did you have a comment? Okay. Yes. Sorry, I'll come back to you. Yes.
No any website provide check the jurisdiction.
You're saying, is there a website that will check? Do you mean you want one for your benefit or? Right, no, I understand what you're asking. I'm trying to figure out if you mean, in other words, are you asking, I'm saying, do you want that resource for yourself or do you want us to look it up? You see what I'm saying? Yeah, well, there are some, I might be able to give you a couple of good resources that you can use that give at least a little bit of that, that are available free, just to anybody. But yeah, that's a great question. The question was about plagiarism and checking your work just to make sure, yeah, even if there were some accidental issues that cropped up and you forgot to put quotation marks around something or, who knows what. There are a few sites, I'll probably give you some links to them, that can do that to some extent. The best ones, unfortunately, are behind a paywall, so they're usually not easily available to anybody. But you can, there are some really good ones that actually compare to databases of articles and databases of previous dissertations and theses. But to put it simply, the electronic submission process that we're asking you to do, it doesn't have that built in. It's not part of this particular software. But obviously we're keenly watching out for these kinds of issues, and we would encourage you to do your utmost to watch out for them well in advance so that we don't end up in any kind of a perilous situation. I might follow up with you and send you some links for some ideas, if that helps. That's a good question, though. Just for the sake of time, let me say a couple more things, and I'll be happy to stick around and address any further questions anyone else has. Again, for that initial submission, March 27th, if you're graduating spring, or the analogous deadline for the other semesters, you bring these 4 items in. There's a checklist. There's a declaration of academic honesty. Those are both available right here under resources. You print them out. You fill them out as needed and sign as needed. The checklist requires the department chair as well as your advisor to sign off. So it's in other words, it's giving a full departmental and committee confirmation that this document is ready to be submitted. I mentioned this a while back at the beginning of the session. We were talking about research clearance, that everybody actually has to get research clearance. And this is one of the things that most throws people off at the last moment. You're ready to submit everything else, but you don't have this. We don't want that to become a problem for you, so I'm going to remind you of it right now. It's a very simple process. It's really quite painless. Once your document is virtually done, it doesn't have to be 100% done. It can be virtually done. If you have the abstract, if you have the methodology chapter more or less complete, what you do is you go to this page. There's a link to it right here, and you send a form to the Office of Research Compliance and Ethics. They will get back to you, and they do have a really good turnaround. It's always within 3 days. All they're doing is they're looking at your research methodology, what kinds of things you were doing, what your research entailed, and they're making sure that there's no clear problem with that. For certain types of research, for instance, if you're doing human research, you would have had to have prior clearance before doing your research for it to be valid. Hopefully, you will have done so. But even for those who do not need prior clearance, this is kind of their way of affirming that everything has gone through without any trouble. So in other words, they're going to say, yes, it's true. You didn't do anything with human subjects. You didn't require any kind of special clearance. Check. And they're going to send you an email to that effect within 3 business days of submitting this form. So you go here, you submit the form. They'll get back to you fairly quickly. And so you just have to tell them your methodology, and you have to give them your abstract. And when you submit that to us, you can either, you can actually just bring it as a printout. You can print out that email and bring a copy, just so we can literally see that you got this email from rescomp@ncat.edu, and it said exempted, or I can't remember the exact language that it uses. And then the 4th item, again, this is like the preliminary, this is like the permission to submit electronically. You do the advisor-approved digital copy. In other words, it's a copy of the document. And it sounds odd, but there is a reason for it. It's a copy of the document that has your advisor's direct approval ascribed to it. Okay. There are 2 options. The older-fashioned one that we used in the past, and you can still do this, it's fine. You can bring in a CD. The CD will have the PDF of your document burned onto it, and you simply have to have your advisor's signature on the CD. You could write out your name just so we can see who it is that it belongs to, but you simply have to have your advisor sign it. They can literally sign on the CD itself with a permanent marker. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to have any kind of special label. It just has to have the CD, the PDF on the CD, and their signature. The point of this is that they're affirming, your advisor is affirming that this is the version of the document that is ready to be submitted. And thus, when you submit electronically, you're also going to submit a PDF. And it will match, it must match the version that's on this CD. So in other words, when we get the electronic version, we say, yes, that's the right one. That's the same one that was submitted via CD or via email, as you can see here, that has the advisor's approval. This just preempts some minor issues that can come up sometimes where something would change and then the advisor wasn't aware of the change, and then it can become an issue. It really should be a very smooth process. All you have to do is take the PDF you're ready to submit, put it on a CD, have your advisor sign it, bring that into us. Or you can have your advisor directly mail it to me with a message that would say something like, with an attachment, obviously. It would say, the attached document is the approved version of the document, of the dissertation, of the thesis. So in other words, you could mail it to them, and then they could forward it to me with that sort of message. Again, the point is the graduate school will then have in our possession, we'll have a copy which the advisor said, yes, this is the approved copy. So it sounds odd, but it's just to mitigate any potential issues that could come up. And if you do it, it's very simple. Really, if you do it right, it's a painless process. Once you submit those 4 items, you are then eligible to, you are then permitted to do the electronic submission. So this is where you're actually going to go in, create an account, set up the submission account so that it will eventually be published to that database that I showed you at the outset. So you're going to go in, I'll just show you this real quick. I won't pull up the whole thing, but on this page, there's another great resource. There are 2 resources that revolve around this. There's how to submit electronic thesis dissertation. This is just like a set of slides, but it really shows you what each page looks like. I also have a video walkthrough on that other page that I showed you, which would guide you through the process step by step. But just to show you what it looks like, it's something like this. You're going to log on to this site. It looks like this. You submit. There's a place to submit your document. You create an account. It's all fairly straightforward, but then it asks you for a lot of detailed information. You have to think about things like copyright options. You have to think about publication options. You have to think about if it's necessary to have an embargo on your work, which is applicable in some cases. So there are a lot of things to consider, and it's worth going through this early, or at least before you're finally submitting and talking through these options. Most students will end up choosing traditional publishing. Again, I'll probably have a separate session just on this for those students, like specifically tailored to only students who are graduating in spring or early summer 2015, where we can literally go through it. You can address questions that you might have for your case. You address publishing options, you address copyright issues, you address release options. So if you had copyright pending or patent pending on some of your work or in the lab that you're working in, it may be obligatory or may be prudent to have a delay of some kind on your work. In other words, not let it be fully published until that patent or what have you has gone through. If that's the case, you can select, I think normally the main option now is 1 year. You can do more if you really need to, if you have a good reason. But you can have it 6 months of a year delay on the release of the document. There's some issues with copyright. Now, indeed, the main document itself, if you've looked at the template or if you look at the handbook, the document has a copyright page built into it. That does carry with it some automatic copyright privileges, but ProQuest, who runs the database, they give you the option of filing for a formal copyright, which you can do, but I mean, there's a fee attached to it. I think they charge maybe $55 or something like that. You could even do that process yourself for, I believe, $35, but they're basically doing it for you and tacking on the $20 fee. You can think about it. I'll give everybody as we get closer to the submission, students who are going to submit will receive information about copyright. For most students, it turns out to be the case that you do not need to file for copyright. In other words, you don't need to pay the extra copyright fee because publishing the document electronically, you have a copyright page. It does carry a core copyright privilege with it. But for some, if you're really concerned, if there are a lot of sensitive issues in play, if there are a lot of patents in play, maybe it's important to you to have a formal filed copyright, which would, I believe, make it easier if there were some legal action required. So again, I'll just point that out. There are those kinds of details that come up in the submission that you'll have to think about in advance once you get to that point. Publishing options, copyright options, bound copies. If you want to buy bound copies that are nicely printed, that's great. You can buy them from ProQuest. They're fairly expensive, I believe, and you have to go on their timeline. It'll take several months, I think, before you'll receive them. There are things to consider, and so you can obviously buy them after the fact too. They'll be happy to take your money later, but it's easiest to do it at the outset. Okay. For the purposes of time, I will more or less stop there and address any final questions, and I'll be happy to stick around even longer if people have more one-on-one kind of questions they want to ask now, since I'm here in the room with you. But again, if you're planning graduating in spring, please look at these deadlines, start planning for your defense. If you're going to graduate over the summer, look carefully at the two options, summer 1 and summer 2. Think about what will work best for you. Talk to your committee members, what will be the possible dates for defense. And then start looking at how to actually submit so that you're ready to do it in advance, and it doesn't need to be something very stressful at the last minute. Okay, so in summary, my main objective today, I think I accomplished it, was to throw a lot of material and a lot of resources at you. Hopefully this page you're taking with you will remind you of the key ones, obviously my contact information, the Thesis Dissertation website. If you go there, you're going to find links to virtually everything we talked about today, including videos, including walkthroughs, so on and so forth. If anybody does have any further final questions at this point, I will happily take them. This is a great question. I was wondering if somebody might ask questions by notes. Someone was asking about EndNote. Now, for most of you in the room, I'm guessing you're not full distance learners if you were able to come today. But it's true, the normal procedure is that you bring them a USB drive to the reference desk in Bluford Library, and they put EndNote on your USB drive, and you take it with you. along with, I think they give you the instructions. I think you'd have to contact them directly. They may be able to just give you the file directly. Maybe they'll send it to you. I'm not sure. But I know they vastly prefer to take it to put it onto your USB drive, so they can do it in person. I think they have to see your ID. There are a couple of funny things. So if you call them, I would be surprised if they didn't have a system for distance learners, whether it's, you send them your information or what. I would call the library and ask. That's the best way to get that information. I hope you found this useful. Please do follow up with me by email. You can come by my office if you have questions. And obviously, if you're going to be graduating in spring, you're going to get a lot more information from me, direct communications about the deadlines, about things to keep in mind, about other workshops. So look for those as well. Thank you very much.